Miami, 1988. People weren't just dying anymore, they were vanishing. No bodies, no witnesses, no trace. At first it looked like chaos, a drug war spiraling out of control. But investigators found something far worse. A system that didn't just kill, it erased. And one agent got too close to proving it existed. It didn't stop. That was the strange part. By 1988, the violence in Miami wasn't shocking anymore. Gunshots didn't make headlines the way they used to. Sirens didn't turn heads. Blood on the pavement became part of the background. Because for nearly a decade, this city had been at war. Not a war declared by governments, not a war fought by soldiers, but a war built on powder, cocaine. Back in the late 1970s, Miami became the front door of something massive. Shipments flooded in faster than law enforcement could keep up. The money followed immediately after. Millions, then billions, stacked, hidden, moved, washed. At the center of it all were powerful organizations like the Medellin cartel. And behind that empire stood men like Pablo Escobar, a name that would become synonymous with wealth, power, and violence. But by the time 1988 arrived, something had changed. Not the money, not the drugs, the violence. It became quieter, not gone, not reduced, just different. The shootouts that once erupted in broad daylight started disappearing. The bodies that used to be found in cars, alleys, and sidewalks became harder to find. At first, no one noticed. Then people started asking questions, and the answers were far more disturbing than anyone expected. Because in 1988, people weren't just being killed anymore, they were vanishing. No witnesses, no crime scenes, no bodies, just gone. And in a city already drowning in crime, that kind of silence was more dangerous than anything that came before it. The illusion of control. From the outside, it looked like things were improving. Police reports showed fewer public shootouts. News coverage began to shift focus. There were whispers that maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. But inside the system, the people who actually worked these cases knew better. They could feel it. Something wasn't right. Because crime doesn't just disappear overnight. It evolves. Federal agents started noticing patterns, or more accurately, the lack of them. Cases that should have connected didn't. Known traffickers suddenly stopped appearing in surveillance. Informants went silent. Entire networks seemed to dissolve into thin air. It didn't make sense. Until they realized this wasn't chaos, it was strategy. A new kind of war. The old system was loud. Cartels controlled everything from the top down. Orders came from powerful figures. Violence was used openly, brutally to send messages. But that kind of structure came with a weakness. It could be tracked. Wiretaps, informants, paper trails. Law enforcement had started closing in, and the cartels knew it. So they adapted. Instead of running everything themselves, they began to break their operations into smaller, disconnected pieces. No central command, no clear hierarchy, no obvious targets. And that's when the ghost crews began to appear. The crews that didn't exist. They didn't have names, at least not official ones. No one leader, no fixed members, just small groups. 3, maybe 5 people at most, handling specific tasks. Transportation, storage, enforcement. They operated in the shadows. And if something went wrong, they disappeared. No records, no loyalty, no trace. One former investigator would later describe it like this. It was like trying to chase smoke. You knew it was there, but you could never grab it. The first signs. It started with small things. A known distributor misses a meeting. A low-level runner stops answering calls. A stash house gets cleared out overnight, with no sign of forced entry. At first, these were written off as routine. People in this world disappeared all the time. They ran, they hid, they got arrested. But then the numbers started adding up. More disappearances, more empty spaces where people used to be, and still, no bodies. That was the part that kept investigators awake at night, because in the past, violence in Miami had always been visible, messy, public. Now it was invisible, and that made it far more dangerous. The Everglades theory rumors began to spread, quietly at first, then louder. If there were no bodies, where were they going? One theory pointed to the Everglades, miles of swamp, dense vegetation, wildlife that didn't leave much behind. It was the perfect place to make someone disappear. Another theory suggested offshore dumping, boats heading out late at night, returning empty, no evidence, just patterns and silence inside the system. At the same time, there was another problem, one that no one wanted to say out loud. Corruption, not everywhere, not everyone, but enough to matter. There were whispers that certain operations were being tipped off before raids. That evidence wasn't always making it into reports, that some names were being protected. And in a war like this, even a small leak could be deadly. Because if the people enforcing the law couldn't fully trust the system, then who was really in control? The money never stopped. Despite everything, the fear, the disappearances, the uncertainty, one thing remained constant: the money. It flowed through Miami like a second bloodstream, invisible but powerful. Cash was being funneled into luxury real estate, high-end nightclubs, shell businesses. Entire neighborhoods began to change. Buildings went up faster than anyone could explain. Money moved in ways that didn't make sense. But no one asked too many questions, because in 1988, Miami, money talked louder than truth. A detective's realization. Somewhere in the middle of all this, one detective, whose name never made headlines, came to a chilling conclusion. This wasn't a decline in violence. It was an upgrade. The system had become more efficient, more controlled, more silent, and far harder to stop. Because when violence becomes invisible, it becomes unstoppable. There was a case, one disappearance that didn't fit the pattern, one name that refused to fade quietly into the background. And that case would begin to unravel everything. The name wasn't supposed to matter. That's how it usually worked in 1988. People disappeared, and the world kept moving. No headlines, no pressure, no real investigation. But this time, it was different. His name was Daniel Ruiz. Not a kingpin, not a cartel boss, just a mid-level distributor trying to climb his way up in a system that rewarded ambition and punished mistakes. Daniel wasn't reckless. He didn't draw attention. He didn't make enemies, at least not openly. Which is why, when he vanished, people noticed. The last night. The last confirmed sighting of Daniel Ruiz was just after midnight, a quiet meeting. No witnesses beyond the people already in the game, no cameras, no official record. But investigators would later piece together fragments. He had been called in, that much was clear. Not by someone above him, but by someone new. That was unusual. In the old system, everything followed a chain of command. You knew who you answered to, you knew who gave the orders. But in 1988, those lines were gone. Daniel walked into that meeting, expecting business, negotiation, maybe a warning. He never walked out. No scene, no evidence. When authorities finally started asking questions, they ran into a wall. No signs of struggle, no abandoned car, no witnesses willing to talk. Even the people who had seen him that night suddenly couldn't remember anything. Or wouldn't. It was as if Daniel Ruiz had been erased. And that's when one investigator, Agent Thomas Hale, started to take a closer look. Hale wasn't new to Miami. He had seen the chaos of the early drug wars, the shootouts, the blood, the bodies. But this was something else. He started pulling files, missing persons, unresolved cases, names that had quietly disappeared over the past year. And what he found didn't look random. It looked organized, not in the traditional sense. There was no central figure tying everything together, no single network. But there was a pattern. Each disappearance followed the same structure: a private meeting, a sudden loss of contact, immediate silence from associates. No physical evidence left behind. It was too clean, too consistent. This wasn't chaos, it was design. At one point, Hale got closer than anyone had been in months. A low-level courier, nervous, unstable, but desperate, agreed to talk. He claimed to know about the crews, the ones no one could trace. He described them in fragments. They don't stay together. They don't use names. You don't see the same faces twice. According to him, these crews weren't loyal to anyone. They were hired, used, then replaced. Like tools, he said. Hale pushed for more. Names, locations, anything. The courier agreed to meet again. He never showed up. 2 days later, his apartment was found empty. No struggle, no signs of forced entry, just another disappearance. Then came the break. It wasn't supposed to happen. A routine patrol, a noise complaint. But what officers found inside that small, unremarkable house changed everything. At first glance, it looked abandoned. Furniture stripped, rooms empty. But there were signs, subtle ones. Recently cleaned floors, faint chemical smells, marks on the walls that didn't quite make sense. And then, in one of the back rooms, they found it. A section of flooring that had been removed and replaced. Poorly. When they pulled it up, they expected drugs, cash, weapons. Instead, they found nothing, just disturbed earth. And that was the problem. Because it meant something had been there and someone had taken the time to remove it. For Hale, that was the moment everything clicked. This wasn't just about killing people. It was about removing them completely. No bodies, no evidence, no cases. Because without a body, there's no murder. And without a murder, there's no investigation. It was the perfect system. By now, the fear had spread beyond the streets. People inside the system started to feel it too. Officers stopped pushing too hard on certain leads. Informants became harder to find. Even experienced agents began to hesitate because the rules had changed. Before, violence was loud. You knew where it came from. You knew what it meant. Now it came without warning, and it left nothing behind. With no bodies to track, Hale shifted focus. Money. Because money always leaves a trail, or at least it used to. He began digging into property records across Miami, looking for patterns, unusual purchases, cash transactions, and he found them. Properties bought outright. No financing, no clear ownership. Shell companies, layered accounts, names that didn't lead anywhere. But the timing matched the disappearances. Money was moving, and wherever it went, people vanished. The deeper Hale dug, the more resistance he faced. Files went missing. Requests got delayed. Superiors started asking questions, not about the case, but about him. Why he was digging so deep. Why he wouldn't let it go. That's when he realized something dangerous. This wasn't just happening in the streets. It was touching the system. And if he kept pushing, he might not just lose the case, he might disappear too. Then another name surfaced. Not a criminal, not a distributor, a banker, someone who handled accounts, someone who saw the money move, and just like Daniel Ruiz, he vanished. Same pattern, same silence, same absence of evidence. But this time, it confirmed something far bigger. This wasn't just about controlling the drug trade. It was about controlling the flow of money behind it. And anyone who saw too much didn't last long. By late 1988, a quiet understanding began to settle over those who were paying attention. This war hadn't ended. It had evolved into something smarter, colder,